Welcome to Failing Forward. Oh, fuck, I already fucked it up.
No, you didn't.
I feel like I feel
Just keep
like
it
it
in.
just
Keep it
sounded
in.
weird.
Just let it roll.
Okay, yeah. Welcome to Failing Forward, where our motto is learn to fail and you'll finally succeed. I'm Nick, and I'm here with my co-host Harris.
Hello.
And today we're going to talk about a college project that we did called Sentinel, a robot. Well, actually, I'll let you take it away, Harris. You're the one who's going to introduce this.
Yes. So this is what, junior year in undergrad.
Yeah,
I
started.
was
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah. I was in a research program at the time, Illinois something something undergraduate research, and as part of that, I needed a project. And so I looked around, and there was this competition hosted by a company called SICK Incorporated, which is a German
Mm,
company that makes LiDAR sensors and probably a bunch of other stuff that I don't really remember. But the key part for this podcast is they make LiDAR sensors. And
right.
they had this challenge called the TIM 10K Challenge, where they would provide you with a two-dimensional LiDAR sensor, and you have to use this sensor in some unique and novel way and create a solution and find a new application to utilize this LiDAR sensor in any industry. And there was like a process where we had to write like a proposal, submit it, and if it gets accepted, we can make our solution. And then if we win, first place gets $10,000 and a trip to Germany, which is very near and dear to Nick's heart because he is
Yes.
German, kind of,
My
sort
family's German,
of.
technically American, I guess.
Yeah.
But that's where the
Um,
10K comes from.
that's where the 10K.
$10,000
That's where the 10K
with a
comes
nice.
from, and I got permission to pursue this project for my research goals in junior year, and so as I did this, Nick came to mind because I thought there was a lot of like mechanical stuff that could happen. So I asked him if he wanted to collaborate. He said yes, and that is kind of how this entire project came to be. Um, so yeah, anything else you want to say, Nick, before we start diving into some of the details here?
I'm just gonna say that I really wish we had won the project because that trip to Germany would have been nice. I think it's in Waldkirch in Germany, and it seemed like a nice little place to be. And I'm actually looking at our final report, and there's a lot of really fun images here. First of which, I just want to say one thing: there's grease everywhere, and that was all because of me as the mechanical leads.
Yep.
And the second thing is with the $10,000, it was just you and me. Like,
Correct.
besides the rest of the team, I don't. I think we said we would split it with our graduate student advisor, who we won't say his name because we don't know if that's public. I did try to find him and I couldn't find him today, so I don't know. He's very buried.
Uh-huh.
But did say we'd split it with him, but we wanted to keep the team also as small as possible. I think one because we knew that we liked working with each other, which might not be great for engineering, but two, fewer ways to split the money, which is always great. And
Correct.
I think most of the teams we went against were like 5 to 6 people, and there
Hmm.
was a limit, but which was like about 6 people, and I think we were the underdogs.
Yes. Yeah. So one thing I do want to point out, because I found this out when I did my preliminary research for this podcast. So when we did this competition, it was a two-dimensional LiDAR sensor that I'll say this live on the record, it was kind of crappy. It was not great. There's a lot of other issues that we ran into trying to use it. Um, and the competition this year, the 10K challenge for this academic year, gives
Right.
teams a 16 layer, 360-degree LiDAR sensor with accompanying accessories.
Right.
Now, I point this out because this will come back to our proposal, our idea, and why we thought it was unique and novel in a little bit. But
Hmm.
yeah. And then also, they changed the location from Germany to Minnesota. So,
So do you even get the trip to Germany anymore?
no, that's the trip. Like, that's where it goes. Um,
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah, I
Minneapolis,
could just go to,
Minnesota.
yeah, Minnesota. Exactly where I want to be.
Yep.
Nothing against Minnesotans. Just, it's a good state. We'll move on.
So
Actually, I did want to ask quickly. We should explain what a lidar is, unless you're planning on saying that.
I actually was not, but now that you bring it up, that is a great
Okay.
thing to explain. So LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. You might notice the I is missing, but it's accompanied for in the
Yeah.
word light. Anyways, it's
Hmm.
a way that you can determine ranges in your nearby environment using a laser. So you just measure the time that it takes the light to bounce back to the receiver, and then you can map out your nearby environment. And you can find this sensor in a lot of like self-driving cars and a lot of applications that need distance updated that much. So a lot of iPads today actually have lidar sensors in them for better focus detection and that sort of thing. But yeah, I think that's a
But it's a
decent
much
explanation.
simpler lidar, right? It's like the one in the iPads,
I think so. I'm not
or is it not?
100% sure what they've implemented, but
Right.
it's good enough that you can construct point clouds with just an iPad and nothing else, which is actually kind of cool.
Wow.
But
Is that
yeah,
also how the Kinect worked? The Xbox Kinect?
I do not remember. And man, that is a blast from
Okay.
the past.
Yeah. But just to drive the point home, it's invisible sensing. I mean, it's using light, but to the naked eye, you wouldn't really know it's doing anything.
Hmm.
And it's very fast.
Yep.
I think that was the whole thing that we thought was good about this sensor. Because it's 2D, you're only scanning out a small area compared to a 3D sensor that's scanning out all of space.
Yep.
So it's relatively faster, and we thought that would be the selling point of what we came up with.
Yep. Also, I looked it up. The
Yeah.
Kinect does use LiDAR, which makes perfect sense.
Nice.
Famously,
Yeah.
though,
So it's
Tesla does not use LiDAR in their cars, and they refuse to. And their rationale
yeah.
is humans don't need a LiDAR. We just have cameras and we're fine. Which is a very sketchy argument that I'm not
Yeah.
going to get into in this podcast, but I always think that's very interesting.
Maybe in a couple years on another episode of Failing Forward, we'll
It's just
go
about
into it.
Elon. We'll do a multi part series about his downfall.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, yeah, when we started this project, we didn't know what we were going to make. So, Nick and I did a lot of analysis of the previous year's winners and just some general
Mm.
market research to see what would actually be like a thrilling and novel and nice new way to apply a 2D LiDAR sensor to solve some problem that no one had ever thought of before. So, the year before us, the $10,000 first place winner were these guys who put the lidar sensor on the back of a car, and no, sorry, not the
Mhm.
car. Actually, they were the car. I think they put it on the back of a car and they drove around. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Those are the guys who beat us. The one before, the
Yeah,
year
those are the
before
guys who
us,
beat us.
the year before they made a robot. They put the sensor pointing to the ground and they had it scan the roads looking for like nails and stuff. And their
Right.
application was airports, I think. And they were like, oh, if an
Yeah.
airplane runs over a nail, the tire will pop. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Honestly, I think that is as an aside, I think that's a smart way to use it.
Hmm.
I'm just annoyed that the winner of the next competition did the same exact thing, but
Exactly.
just a different application. But
Yep.
I guess that's innovation versus research. It's not
Exactly.
always new, it's just a different application that nobody thought of before.
Yeah. So we'll go back to the
Yeah,
winner,
tricky
but
world.
yeah. So we
Yeah.
saw that, and we looked at some of the other winners. I don't even remember, but I think one of our
Yeah.
key takeaways was all of the winners and all the ideas that we liked found some way to get 3D data out of a 2D sensor. And the way that they did that
Hmm.
was by translating a 2D sensor in some way. So in that airport example with the robot driving it around, you can move, like an XY plane, and there's your third dimension, right? And in the idea that beat us, strapping onto a car, exact same thing. So
Yeah.
we got to wondering, there's got to be a way that we can make a 3D point cloud of the nearby environment and do something with it. And then
Yes.
we came up, or Nick rather, came up with the nice mechanism to do so, which I'll let him talk about in a second. And then I think you also found the application, which was security. So I don't know if you wanted to go into that.
Yeah. I remember the when you came to me with this idea, you called me up because at that time we were just like calling each other every
Yeah.
week, and just chatting. And that's when you said, "Hey, I've got this research project. Let's make this robot." And we had to think of a reason to make this thing. Like, the application for the sensor. And I think this is always a typical student thing where we don't know what the problem we're going to solve is. We just know we want to do a cool thing, so we have to find the thing, the application that it will fit.
Hmm.
And not sure if that's the best way. I'm pretty sure that's not how the people who usually win these things come up with solutions.
Yeah.
But that's how we did it. And we thought, well, we kind of just want to make an autonomous robot, and a LiDAR sensor is a great vision sensor. And it'd be great to get hands on this thing and work with it. And the whole thing was like, can we figure out how to detect people in somebody's house and come up with this autonomous robot that just roams around your house that kind of has a personality like a Roomba? And we use their 2D LiDAR sensor to figure it out. But the problem we had was, how do you differentiate between a human and chair legs or something like that?
Mhm.
So that's where we started thinking, well, we have to make this thing 3D. And for the proposal part, we just had to come up with the application. And I actually, one of my favorite things reading back through this is, I think we took it out of the final report, but in all of our other materials, we always cited this one figure that was like 10 people of security die every year, needless deaths because it was at night. And we said this robot would prevent that from happening because you wouldn't need a security guard. Instead, you just put it in your warehouse and it would detect intruders instead of a human being put in harm's way. And they gave us funding, they gave us a sensor to do this.
Hmm.
So they really liked it enough, I guess. But that was the
Yep.
first part, was just figuring out what the application should be. The second part was, now how do we actually execute it? And that's where we got into a lot of really deep math. And I guess I'll lay out the big things. I mean, the first thing was, if you have an autonomous robot, if you have a robot, how do you make it autonomous? How do you tell it where to go? And then if you want to detect things in the environment, how are you going to, what type of math do you need to do that? And I think, Harris, you must have had one that what were you working on for this portion of the project? Because I think I forgot totally what you were working on. It was mostly, I was just doing a lot of this math research and getting lost in the weeds. And
Hmm.
but I
Yeah.
know we were both doing a lot of good work.
Yeah, I did nothing. I just kind of sat there and let you chew for a while and came back and reaped the rewards now. Um, so in the beginning, it was a lot of organizational stuff. I remember one of the biggest
Mhm.
challenges was finding an advisor to attach to, because I
That's right.
I was an undergrad in computer engineering, and while I was in this research program, I didn't have a research advisor, and they were like, it was kind of weird because normally when you get in a program like that, you already have an advisor picked out. And I had like a
Mhm.
list, but they were all already assigned to students and they couldn't take on any more. So they just came to me and they were like, it's great that you want to do this competition, but you're going to need an advisor. So you better find one fast. And I asked a few of my professors and some classes I was taking and got a variety of rejections in different formats.
Mhm. Yeah.
And then eventually, I think I told Nick about this, and then you reached out to some of your professors, and that's how we ended up
Mhm.
with a one of the mechanical engineering professors, and I think her
Yeah.
graduate student, right?
Right. And I will say the professor's name just because professors are public.
Yeah.
This was Dr. Amy Laviers, and
Hmm.
I remember she went to Georgia Tech,
Hmm.
and she did a lot of stuff with robotics that was not typical. So that's
That's
why I
right.
thought it would
Yeah.
be fun to work with her. And also, a lot of students. One of my professors was a PhD student her from her lab. So I
Yeah.
thought I had a lot of interaction with her students. Maybe she'd be a great advisor.
And here's a
But
true fact: I never met her once.
yeah, and I gotta add, Harris, I was totally off campus during the first 5 months. I never all this stuff was over Zoom before COVID happened,
Uh
which
huh.
was crazy.
Uh huh.
Like we would do these. I think you would just call me on the phone. We didn't even do Skype or Zoom because Zoom didn't exist. You just called me on the phone, and then we opened up a slideshow, and I said, "Okay, are you guys on the same slide? Okay, go to slide 3." And then I would walk you guys through the slide, and you and the graduate student would be standing there
Yeah.
and just looking at what I said. And then after I talked about my stuff and we talked about it, you and Austin were like, oops, said his name.
It's fine.
It's fine. You and you and Austin were like, okay, Nick, you can go. And hang up the phone, and you guys would talk.
Yeah,
Harris, you were a trooper. You were really the person on the ground, basically
that
the
was
guy in
me.
Washington D.C. doing all the work.
Boots on the ground, like fulfilling my mission. But
Exactly.
yes, so while Nick, you were very focused on the mechanism to get this 2D sensor and make it 3D. You were in the weeds of the math. I was more on the software side of things, and so one of the first things I was figuring out was how we could wire together the Arduino and the Raspberry Pi and have a
Hmm.
portable battery pack, all stuff I've done before. But because this was my first research project, I wanted to do it right. And actually, I don't know about you, Nick, but for me, this actually marked a big transition in terms of the kind of work I wanted to do. Because for a while, I thought I would go right into industry and become the best programmer there ever was. But then I kind of became a lot more interested in machine learning, AI, and the state of the art, and working on things that I thought were truly novel. And it was it marks the change of where a lot of people like live to program, but I'm not one of those people, and I kind
Hmm.
of view code as a tool to just accomplish a greater task, And it also
Right.
marked a change in my life from I thought I wanted to do computer architecture, but then I went into software. So I was coming into a lot of new things at once, and one of the other things working with Austin was that he seemed very skeptical, but I could also
Hmm.
tell we were out of his domain. So he was kind of like, I would tell him my ideas for, once Nick makes his mechanism, then we can take these XYZ point clouds and we can import
Hmm.
them into the software and the viewer can use it. And we can back it up on AWS and it'll be secure. And I was also found a few research papers that described different convolutional neural nets. I think I butchered that word, but whatever.
Mm.
CNNs, and these CNNs
Yeah.
could detect and classify point clouds. So the problem that Nick alluded to earlier of is it a person,
Mm.
is it an object? There are massive data sets out there of people who have captured point clouds like this and painstakingly labeled it. And so we could
Oh
take those
man.
models, fine tune on them to detect indoor objects and do something similar. So I pitched that whole idea to Austin, and he looked at me like, "You're insane. That'll never work. What year are you living
Hmm.
in?" But he also, I could tell from the way that he was kind of looking at me, he was kind of like, "I don't write any code, so if you say it can be done, whatever. All I got to do is sign off on your like check-ins, and I'll be
Yeah.
fine, right?"
Yeah.
um,
And Austin was just a master's student, and I can't imagine like most master's students don't do this type of stuff. Like they're because they pay for school for the 2 years and then they want to get out and get a job.
yep.
And I think he really did just get a job. So he was about to graduate while he was just meeting with us. And I think for him, it was just fun to listen to what we were coming up with. But most
Yep.
of the time, it sounded like he was just giving us advice. But yeah, I don't think none of us really knew what we were doing
Nope.
at the moment. Like we were we were all figuring it out. And that's what I loved. Because
Yep.
I agree. It was a turning point with, I had no idea how any of the math worked. And I was trying to figure it out. I didn't have the tools to go through this dense forest of all of the math that we're going through and how do you even explain to somebody how this stuff works.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a common problem I think that comes up in engineering is you have this really complicated problem, a lot of things are happening, but how do you pick out what the most important thing is? And I think some of it is experience, just knowing like what is it, trying to figure out what's the most strong effect on
Yep.
what you're trying to measure. Like in our case it'd be like we're trying to get this point cloud, how do we figure out which input to the whole robot is controlling how that point cloud comes out?
Mm-hmm.
And I had no tools for any of that. I had no idea how to explain it, so I was just like word vomiting to you guys like,
Yeah.
yeah, there's this update matrix and yeah, it was just crazy. I was trying to plot all the elements of the matrix over time.
Mm-hmm.
If I went back to it, I'm curious how it would go, but yeah, it's really funny thinking back. Like this made me want to work on really complicated problems because the problems that were fun to solve were the ones where the solution didn't come easy. And
Exactly.
in classes, they never usually give you those problems because they're just as frustrating as they are satisfying. And
Yes.
it's very easy to. I actually don't think this problem would make me quit engineering, but if I was going to get graded on it, it would definitely seem very cruel.
Hmm. And yeah, I think I've always been a firm believer that if you're not out of your comfort zone and you're not challenging yourself, you're not growing. And I'm
Yeah.
also a big believer in the idea that if it was easy, everyone would do it, and I don't want to be everyone.
Mm.
I want to be different,
Yeah.
and I want to try something exciting. And you gotta aim for a distant galaxy to land on the moon, and you gotta aim for the moon to land in the sky or something. There's a different way
Mhm.
that phrase goes, but I think you know what I'm trying to say here. And
Yeah, shoot
s-
for the stars and you'll land on the moon. I think that's the
something like
phrase.
that. Yeah.
Yep.
And there was a lot in this project that, just like Nick, I didn't know either. I had just done an internship at a engineering company, and I learned a lot about like software and version control and that kind of stuff. And so I was applying a lot of the ideas, technologies, frameworks that I had just learned to this. And at the time, Nick, you weren't so up to speed on programming, and especially things like sprints and that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
that was actually a cool opportunity to kind of show what I had learned in like an industry setting, and also finding what didn't work and just abandoning things that we thought were stupid. But yes, just like you, Nick, there
Yeah.
was a lot here that I was doing for the first time, especially the machine learning stuff, which never really made it to fruition for reasons that we can get into in a little bit. But uh,
Yeah.
you know, gotta dream big to to get anywhere, I think. So,
Yeah.
yep.
So I think that's a. I think I want to talk about three big things, which one of them is machine learning, like you said.
Hmm.
The other thing would be the mechanism, and maybe the last thing would be kind of how the end of the project came about.
Yep.
Like, because those three things seem to be the biggest things that machine learning we never really got it off the ground, but seeing how it's taken off and how we're both kind of working in machine learning, it's it's fun to think back. Like, I feel like all the tools have developed to make that problem much easier
Hmm.
to solve. And like you said, there's data sets out there. Like we were, I don't want to say we were ahead of our time, but maybe we were on the cutting edge, even if we weren't the people who were actually pushing the cutting edge. We were having thoughts of other people were having the same at the same time.
If you won't say it, I will. We were ahead of our time.
Nice. And that's how it goes. Well, yeah, this mechanism. So let's go to the mechanism. The I remember designing this thing was such a pain in the butt because we have a video online, and I don't know how we'll get the URL out there, but if you just look it up, Project Sentinel, you should find it. That's the final video. But the way we were trying to design this is just wherever the sensor in this the small light detector inside of this big sensor, wherever that was, I was trying to rotate it about that axis, like a gimbal joint in 2D, so that it would only raise one side of it up at a moment. So it would be like you have an individual laser scanning up and down, and then you have a bunch of them scanning up and down all around. It's such a crazy idea, and I can't explain it in words because it really is something you just need to see. And it's such a crazy, weird design. And we also wanted to only use one motor because the fewer actuators you can use, the less draw on your battery. Usually, the easier it is to design the thing. And to do that, we just it was all geometry, and that was what the other pain in the butt was because we didn't have any. I didn't know how to manufacture things very well. All I had was a 3D printer, so it was designing things in a CAD program, 3D printing them, and while I was off on my internship, working with you guys remotely, I was printing things, fitting them together to try and get it to work. And I think I just had a box. By the time I came back from my internship, I brought a whole box of all the parts for the design, and you and I met up, and we just tried to put it all together one night. This was like the first time we had gotten together since the whole start of the project, which I thought was so amazing that it
And
was amazing we even got together to put it together and that it even worked. But
yeah,
it took so many, literally blood and
I remember
I guess
that.
no tears and not really any sweat. So it just took a little bit of blood to get this thing running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, maybe for the listeners, one way to maybe visualize this mechanism would be, imagine you have a coin that you spin, and then right at the very end, you know how it kind
Mm,
of circularly kind of rotates around its z-axis on the table, and then imagine you put an
yeah.
ultrasonic sensor on one part of the coin, and you can then imagine that if you rotated that coin enough, you would eventually get a 360 capture point cloud. I don't know if that helped, but that's
Right.
always how I kind of thought of this mechanism and helped me. So maybe
Yeah.
it'll help someone else.
No, it's if you watch a coin in slow motion as it's settling to the table after you've spun it, that's exactly what it is. Yeah, it's
Yep.
like weirdly rolling around the table and other sides of the coin's being tilted around, and that's imagine that that whole coin is like the plane of the 2D sensor.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that.
It's a
Sorry, go
yeah, it's a tough thing to describe. We're doing our best here, folks.
ahead. First podcast, so
Yeah.
trying our best.
First podcast, first episode.
But yeah, that and also the blood that Nick was alluding to was we had to do a lot of wire splicing because there were surprisingly a lot of wires that we had to do because the robot could move itself with three different wheels. So we had three different motors,
Hmm.
and then we had all the wiring that we needed for the sensor, which included an Ethernet wire and a bunch of power cables and that sort of thing. And
Hmm.
we had to do a lot of splicing and soldering of all the wires and everything. Actually, I don't think we soldered too much, but I remember when Nick took the X-Acto knife and accidentally hit his finger, and then he needed a band-aid in my house at like 10 p.m.
Yeah.
on a random weekend when we were working on this thing. Um, but yeah, no, it was very cool, and or it was very fun to work on it. And so yeah, and I also
Yeah.
want to touch on that theme of remote work because I think, and maybe I'm calling this prematurely, I feel like that was the nail in the coffin for our project and how far
Mm.
we wanted to take it.
Oh, interesting.
So we handled Nick's internship pretty well. And shout out to Nick. He could have been one of those deadbeat project members, but he did not do that, and I was very grateful for
Instead, I
that.
carried it on my back.
Well, let's not go too far there.
Yeah.
But he was, very much in contact and always updating the code and the documents and whatever needed to be done, as well as all the 3D printing and the mechanism design. So that was fun. And then there was I don't remember how long. Let's just call it like a month or so, where we were in person. We were able to schedule regular meetups, test out 3D prints, test out new
Hmm.
mechanism, get the wiring together, and we were just making an immense amount of progress. We had, I think it was two check-ins with the, was it with the competition folks or was that with the professor? I actually don't remember who we had to check in with. I feel like it was the
So the check
competition
it
people.
was with the competition people, yeah, and it was a very strange check-in. And looking at our presentations, it was I think we really needed a professor or somebody who had experience because the stuff we put on there was good, but it wasn't as good as it could have been. Like a professor would have known what do these types of people want to see on these project check-ins. And we were doing things like I mean, it's good to show them next steps, but I think we could have worded it. We could have brought the wording down to be less technical and more understandable because I think they were like HR people from the company, and English was not their first language, but they spoke English pretty well still. So it would have been good to have somebody to help us like translate what we were saying to them to like what is the most important thing about the project. But
Yep.
yeah, it was for the company, and I don't know how these check-ins went. If we got graded, I think it really was just for them to make sure that we didn't just
Do
not do
nothing.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We kind of gave like an engineering brief to HR
Hmm.
reps, which goes about as well as you can imagine. Like I think there was a lot of head nodding and not a lot of questions.
Right. Hmm.
But yeah, I there are some things that I really liked about this. Like one of the things that we focused on in the beginning was a high level diagram showing the flow and connectivity of everything, and I thought that really
Right.
helped Nick and I get organized, but also it allows everyone else to understand where you are in like your roadmap and your process and that kind of stuff. So that was
Yeah.
really, really good, I thought. A lot of but we can't show it on a podcast. But a lot of like videos and a lot of screenshots of code and what we had to do. Um,
Hmm.
and I guess some of the, at least for me, some of the downsides to this were it was also supposed to be like a Q&A session. Like if we were having problems with the sensor, we could ask them. And
Hmm.
this is where the reason we had an engineering brief was because there was supposed to be like one or two engineers on the call. And I remember one of the
Yeah.
immediate issues that came up was the Ethernet cable just didn't work. Like it wouldn't
Yeah.
transmit data over it. And even when it did work, um, we couldn't figure out how to parse some of the data coming in. So I asked both of these,
Hmm.
and I remember on that call they kind of just looked at each other and were like, "I don't know. I think like Larry in the back might know something about that, but he's on vacation or
Yeah.
something." Um,
Nice.
and so we had to
Yeah.
wait. By the way, that connectivity issue was because I don't know if this is a
Hmm.
German thing or a SICK Incorporated thing, but uh, normally by convention, brown or black is ground, and blue or any other color is data, right? And they swapped it, so their brown cable was actually data, and their blue was ground, which is just monumentally stupid. And I'll say that on the record because I have never seen that. And I thought it was bizarre, and of course it all worked once we swapped it. So yeah, that was fun.
Well, that's German engineering for you.
Yes, sir. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a good run. But the mechanism I think also became our final product out of the whole robot
Hmm.
because we bit off more than we could chew, and I like Harris said, it's better to shoot for the stars and land on the moon than to not.
Yep.
But still I think it for this type of competition, biting off more than you can chew doesn't look great.
Hmm.
Because if you're promising a robot and all you give them is a sensor or a mechanism that moves the sensor, it doesn't really sound as good
Yep.
to a non-technical audience. Like, sure, engineers might see the value in it, but even an engineer might say, well, why do they even have a 2D sensor? Why not just buy the 3D sensor?
Hmm.
Because it's one of those. I think one of these things that we got, one of our, I would say, failures or mistakes was that we treated more of a business competition. It's kind of a businessy competition or a product design competition as an engineering technical competition.
Hmm.
Because a lot of the things that interested us were not on that side, like you were saying, Harris, with machine learning.
Hmm.
And I mean, all of these new things we were learning, we just really wanted to get into the weeds with things, but that's not what product design is always about. It's not
Hmm.
about making, and that's what we know now. It's not about making a very complex thing that solves a very specific issue that many people might not have.
Yeah.
It's more about solving an everyday problem that a lot of people have and convincing people this is the solution to it. So I think it's our mentality when we went into the project was different. But I honestly think that we really, like I said in the beginning, we just wanted to make a robot.
Hmm.
And that's why we just wanted the sensor. Like, this would be cool for them to give us a sensor. And what happened to it? I mean, you still have it, right?
Yeah, it's
Like,
sitting in my house. Actually, no. Well,
yeah.
it's disassembled now, and it's in separate cardboard boxes. But yeah, it's sitting like a couple feet away from me in my closet. So
Yeah. Yeah, they just gave us a $2,000 lidar just to
yeah,
have for
yep,
the project. So
yeah,
that was really neat.
yep. So yeah, then we kind of progressed, and in between that first check-in and our second, we made, I would say, a tremendous amount of progress. Like we were able to get all the components talking to each other. We were able to successfully parse all the distances out, and that was a big thing for us because not only was it the distances, but because it's in this mechanism that we described, um,
Hmm.
we had to come up with the formulas. And by we, I mean Nick had to come up with the formulas to convert from the LiDAR measurement to an XYZ coordinate and effectively get a
Yeah.
list of XYZ coordinates. And then on my end, for the nerds in the audience, I got an Electron app that could take in those XYZ points and visualize a point cloud in this very interactive, almost like video game kind of UI where you could kind of pan through, right click to circle around and look at the point cloud. The point clouds were
That was
stored.
very cool.
Yes, yes, it was. The point clouds were stored on AWS, and so we're able to hide behind their security policy and say, oh, it's secure and safe, which it is. And it has like 99% uptime, and you could pull whichever point cloud you wanted to see because it ended up being kind of massive in terms of storage sizes and that kind of stuff. And we
Hmm.
had all of that working by the second check in. And I think at that point, Nick, you started working on the Kalman filter and Ransack,
Yeah.
and then I was working on trying to figure out how we can get the machine learning algorithms working. So we kind of split off in those two directions. But I was really happy with what we had at that second check-in. I designed this sick logo that we use, no pun intended, but a
Yes.
nice logo that we use on all of our PowerPoints, our reports, and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, even our final report has a little monogram in the lower left-hand corner, which
so
I
good.
still remember saying like, "Oh, this looks so good."
It's so good. I loved it. And I think I just designed that in either PowerPoint or Photoshop, but it was great. Um,
Yeah.
and so yeah, we did that second check-in. That was like February, and then we were making good progress, regular check-ins, and then bam, the hammer falls down, and the
Hmm.
pandemic has begun. And I remember that week because
Yeah.
I had a Google Home in my apartment, and I asked it to read me the news every morning when I got up, and then
Nice.
one day it was like, oh, there's this like disease in China that like killed a lot of people, and I was like, oh, that's weird.
Hmm.
And then the next day they were like, this extremely contagious disease has spread west, and it's now in like India and Australia and these other places. I was just like, oh, that's
Yeah.
weird. And then they're like, oh,
Yep.
now it's in like the Middle East and Africa, and then by the end of the week, first confirmed case in Texas or wherever it was, and then
Hmm.
I think the next week we were sent home, and we had to just scram. And at the time, they were
Yep.
like, "Oh, it'll be for 3 weeks just to quarantine," and we all know how that story ended up. So
Hmm.
that ended up with, I think, me putting all the Sentinel stuff in a cardboard box, packing up most of my stuff in my apartment, and driving back home. Um,
Yeah. And that was right after us being able to do this one thing, which was take actually doing our first, what would you call it? The first rough run of with the robot of getting sensor
mhm,
readings in a big room.
mhm,
And I thought that was so we just went to a gym. We went to a racquetball court because it's a big square room. So we put it down, we put the robot in the middle and we just stood in the room to see what it looked like to have a person in the room. It was so interesting.
yep,
And right after that was when COVID hit. After we
mhm,
got our like first big breakthrough, we're like, nice, the robot's working. And then we had to take an extended vacation pretty much, which is why
exactly.
I think I remember that's why we started doing everything was in your garage because
Mhm,
you were at home and I
mhm,
was still on the college campus and you had the robot. So we're like, okay, you are gonna take measurements of some square room and that's your
yes,
garage.
there's the
And that's
biggest
what
one.
our final report ended up being.
Mhm. And it really sucked because we were making a lot of progress, and now we kind of had
Hmm.
to reset and figure it all out, how to do it remotely again. And this was a little bit different because I felt like in the first phase it was okay because it was the work was very easily done remotely, but then this was more complicated because it would be a lot of Nick waiting for me to do runs and I have to send him a video of the
Yeah.
run, and then we would talk about, oh, the mechanism slipped, or this didn't go right, or we need to
Yeah.
change this, and then I'd have to change it and run it, while at the same time trying to look up the machine learning stuff and progress on that
Hmm.
front. And yeah, it kind of became really tough to finish out the project. But I think we did our best. We made a really nice report and then a nice video too that we had to record fully
Hmm.
remotely. So that was also fun. I think
Oh
Nikki sent
yeah.
me he sent me like a video thing that had no audio on it, and then you had to re-record everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I had recorded the entire thing and I guess I just didn't the audio
Yeah.
device wasn't working. Yeah, it was terrible.
Yep.
Yeah, and there's some really good sound bites like the one I just said earlier about that's German engineering for you.
Yep.
I can't believe we put that in the video. That was
It's a little bit of humor.
I
Um,
don't know if they liked that, the Germans.
Yeah, and it was interesting because the final paper and the final video had a very interesting bullet point. And Nick, I don't know if you remember this, but the bullet point was not too technical. Was one of their requirements, which kind of
Oh,
shapes, what this competition really is about, and kind of
yeah.
where we might have gone wrong in the way we approached it. Um, but yeah, so we made the
Yeah, I didn't.
video.
I don't remember that bullet point. I
Yeah,
think that's why we made the report like we did.
yeah. So we
I
made the
clearly didn't see
report,
it.
made the video, and I think by the end of the project, we were at a spot where we could convert the 2D LiDAR data to 3D point clouds pretty reliably. We were able to visualize the results. But one of the things that was kind of biting us was how slow it was, because I forgot how long a
Yeah,
full 360 scan took. But if someone really wanted to like kill a security guard in that time, they probably could.
yeah. It was so we have actually an image where we have 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and 100 seconds, and I think 30 seconds is really a good amount of time that it looked like to measure when there's like a thing in front of the robot,
Mhm.
because you put a garbage can in front of it to see what does a point cloud look like with an object in front of it, and after 10 seconds you just see like a couple points that are just in space, so it's not really that clear. But then after 30 seconds it looked pretty good. But yeah, 30 seconds, if you see this little robot making a rickety sound where it's turning around, and the mechanism almost pulled itself apart. It looked pretty bad.
Mhm.
Like it worked, but it looked pretty bad.
It was very
And
exposed.
yeah, like you could easily just smash the robot up, but I guess, that's a whole other discussion of designing a robot for this purpose. The idea was it was hopeful at best. It didn't work as good as we were imagining it.
Yeah. So we made the video, we made the paper, and I remember we felt pretty good about it, and I was pretty proud because the paper, which I think you ended up writing up in LaTeX, was
Hmm.
pretty nice. Like it was very nicely formatted. You had the logo on there. It looked pretty good.
Yep.
Paragraphs are well formed. I edited the video, and it was a little bit cheesy at times, but like it got the
Hmm.
main point across, and we explained in whatever time limit they gave us. We explained everything. I think really really well. Like there
Yeah.
wasn't like a wasted sentence in there, except maybe the that's German engineering for a sentence, but
That was totally needed.
so we submitted. I forget how long the judging period was, but there was quite a while. And we were going in feeling pretty solid about it because we thought,
Yeah.
hey, we did this novel transformation from 2D to 3D. We had it in this nice UI. We had this awesome
Hmm.
mechanism to do the conversion. And yes, it wasn't perfect, but the proof of concept is there. And, for work in like a semester, there's a lot that we did, and there's a lot of places where it could go. And so we're like, I don't want
Hmm.
to count our chickens, but I think this will be received pretty well.
Yeah.
And Nick, do you want to say
I
what
was feeling
happened?
that way too. Oh man. Yeah, so they wanted to make it a big event. They said all the teams who competed, we're going to have this big virtual event that you show up. It's like the unveiling. And the HR team, or the organizers of the event, they have this slideshow that goes through a lot of the projects. They do honorable mentions, and we're not in the honorable mentions, so I'm feeling pretty good. And we can see, it's in Zoom, we can see all the other people who were also in these things. Like they didn't hide other participants because nobody understood how Zoom worked back then. And they go through the top five things, the top five projects. I think number three or number two was actually another team from our university with five people who actually had a professor. I think they did something about like detecting cracks or faults in bridges,
Hmm.
which with the semi-recent infrastructure failure in the United States is pretty well timed.
Hmm.
But yeah, they didn't win. The people who won they just put the sensor on the back of a car to measure where potholes were. And yeah, you could tell it was more of a product design competition than like an engineering competition, especially with what Harris said,
Hmm.
with the bullet point about not too technical.
Can have technical.
And yeah, yeah. So they won. They got to go to Germany, the car company, the car team. And Harris and I were so bummed. I don't remember what happened, but I know it was just like, well, that's over with. Now let's
Yeah.
do something else. Like that sucks.
Well,
There wasn't. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say, I thought we did place an honorable mention, like a shout out. Like I thought they mentioned our project for like 10 seconds
Oh, in words, maybe.
in
Yeah, I don't
words.
even know if
Yeah.
we got a picture up there. Yeah,
I
and
also want. Sorry, good.
it was hard to tell if we got the honorable mention because they said it in like a thick accent. So I was like, oh, is that our team or was there another team who did something like us? I don't know.
Yeah. Uh, and it was also, I remember, look, I don't have to win every competition, but there was one project where it was some like thesis project where they were tracking something with bats. It was like either bats, no, not
Right.
bats. It was like a whale or something, like something at sea,
Hmm.
beavers or something like that, and they were like tracking their living patterns and how they like when they come back to their dam or their home spot or whatever, and they use this sensor to
Right.
kind of keep track of them. And I was like, that's a really novel application. That's actually really freaking cool. Like I was like, that's
Right.
really creative, out of the box. I never would have thought of that. And I think they were in the same category we were, but they didn't win anything.
Yeah.
And they were just kind of like, oh, look at this team that did this random stuff in an ocean. And here I
Right.
was complaining about being in my my nice temperature controlled house, working on this robot, and meanwhile they were on a boat in the middle of the ocean working with these sensors, and yeah, I was obviously we didn't. I don't think they had all the reports or the videos even like public, but I was
Right.
so interested in what they did, and I was like, how do they not win with something that novel? Um,
I think it would have been great if they shared the projects with us,
yeah,
like the reports of everybody, because then you could actually see. But here's some advice that I've heard, which is these competitions are not to make us better people. Like the goal of the company is not to let us tell us why we didn't win. They just want to say who the winner is and that's it. They don't want to do all the extra work because oftentimes the people who didn't win might not even understand if you gave them a reason.
yep.
And I don't think at the time we were open to understanding the reason.
Uh,
But I was going to transition to saying one of our maybe a concluding question, which is, what do you think? How do you think you would condense what made us not win, or some things that we even learned that were big, very big things that you've realized after looking back on this project that are things that kind of exist in our lives.
hmm
What I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Also, great minds think alike, because I was also thinking to go into the topic of failure, which happens to be the name of the
Yes,
podcast. um,
failing forward.
failing forward. But yes, so just to rephrase your question, make sure I understood it. Condensing what made us fail in this competition. Is that right?
Hmm.
Okay.
I think so. And then another thing I wanted to ask is the follow up is how is are there things that are like true throughout life that we might not have noticed that were true in this competition? Do you want me
Yeah.
to give you a bigger?
No, that's good. That's a wide enough net.
Okay. Okay.
I think so. Condensing what made us fail, I think you kind of nailed it earlier on. I think we're way too much of nerds, and so we went straight into this with a much more researchy, uh, point of view, where we were like, let's find something
Right.
new. Let's find some way the sensor hasn't been used before, and knock knock everyone's socks off, and make something that
Yeah.
someone's never seen before, right? But one of the problems with anything like that is if you make something truly novel and you were truly ahead of your time, no one will know how to use it, and a lot of people won't even know how to understand what it is you just made, right? Like if you think about what
Yeah.
comes out of a think tank or like a research firm that has PhDs in it, they'll
Hmm.
make something truly novel, but it'll be a proof of concept. It'll be far too expensive, and it'll also be behind like a couple papers and hard to understand what it is they've made.
Hmm.
And I forget the exact figure, but I think usually it's like 8 years, 5 to 8 years before industry will ever see any of those changes and stuff. Which is why,
Hmm.
you'll see something novel made like supercapacitors charging phones instantly, or batteries
Hmm.
for like an EV car, but it won't make it into like an industry-wide solution until far later, because there's an understanding, and with economies of scale and with better production, you can actually make that kind of stuff. And with that in mind, I think the same thing happened here, because we gave we gave the outputs of a research project to an HR department and wanted them to understand what it is that we had made. And were disappointed when they didn't, which, of course, in hindsight, when you say it like that, of course it sounds stupid, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah,
think,
I would even
yeah.
add that we're probably not great communicators because most engineering students aren't. And I think we've gotten better, but I definitely said this before. I don't think it's all about saying you have to condense it into words that the person, your audience, is going to understand
Yep.
or even care about. And I don't think we did that because the fundamental assumption a lot of engineers probably make is that their audience will care about what they're doing just because it's part of the project. But it doesn't hurt to make it interesting
Hmm.
and to always keep reminding them why what you're doing is important.
Yeah, and very much this is one of those cases where I think the how does not matter, but the why does. Like that's
Hmm.
really all they really wanted. I don't even think the what matters, just the why, right? You need some
Yeah.
justification. And I would say we should have gone top down and started from the security point of view and then went
Yeah.
and explained our project. But we went the other way around. We started from the bottom and we explained LiDAR and 2D to 3D and worked our way up. And
Hmm.
it's like, that's cool,
Yeah.
but nobody really cares. And that's not what they're
Yeah.
after. Um, so,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Even
then,
if you used a new machine learning technique, the company's not going to care how you did it. They just want to
exactly,
know what does the thing do.
exactly. And my short answer to your second question is that I think if you follow the money, you will find the true reasoning behind everything. And I think this competition
Mm.
is one of those. It's kind of like a hackathon where hackathons are
Right.
not put on for the students' benefit. They're usually put on for the company's benefits because they can show up, they can sponsor it, they can buy some sleep deprived college students some pizza, some free t shirts, some food, and they can show up with a bunch of brand new APIs and software packages and frameworks and say,
Yeah.
here, you win $1,000 if you can come up with some really unique way to use this API. And then they do
Hmm.
it, and then whoever wins wins. And to the company, that's a really small expense, but to the students, it's like, oh, $1,000, that's awesome, right? And
Yeah.
what the company got out of it is free API testing and a bunch of ideas for their business people to go and sell to other people and tell the engineers that it can be used for. And so it's a really cheap way for them to test out some of their software stuff. And I'm saying this as a hackathon
Right.
winner, humble brag from sophomore
Hmm.
year. And a lot of it
Woo-hoo.
was we were testing out their APIs and seeing where they broke. And I thought it was cool. And then later I realized that we got played for fools because we basically
Hmm.
tested their stuff, found the bugs in it, and then we also gave them on like a silver platter a very unique and novel way that it could be applied. And I'm sure they ran with that, and they're probably doing stuff with it today. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great way to summarize everything. And I think the thing with sick, I was also realizing that they really just want an idea of how can they market their sensor because
Mm-hmm.
people probably weren't buying it. And it's one thing to pay people 80 grand a year to try and figure out how to use this, but
Mm-hmm.
you could just get crowdsourcing a bunch of students to go and figure it out. And you don't just get one idea, you get like 20. I think that's how many teams were in the whole thing. And all you have to do is pay them $10,000. I think the runner up got some other
5,000.
money as well. Yeah. And then the trip to Germany, which is nice, but then you also get a lot of students who you can think of hiring in the future and you already know what work they can do. It's really,
Mm-hmm.
we're making companies sound terrible, but it's not really it's a smart thing to do. It's just not all for the students' benefit.
Yep.
But I do want to follow up with, I think this is the final question, is how have we benefited from this project? Even
I
though
haven't.
I think, and that's the end of the podcast. Even though I would we say we functionally failed, or theoretically we failed in the scheme of this project, in the scheme of the competition. I think this failure has taught us a lot of things, as we just said. But what about in some other ways besides what we just said? Is there any other big thing that you can even point to this project?
Yeah, as I kind of talked to at the beginning, this is kind of what changed my mindset into a more researchy mindset, which I think I still, even in my job, even in my other creative projects and stuff, I still carry that same mindset, which is, the idea of if it was easy, everyone would do it. And I think that's lame. I don't want to be lame.
Yeah.
And just, reaching like a little bit outside of your comfort zone and not being afraid to try something new. Because, I think there was a time where I would have looked at a project like this and I would have looked at Nick the same way that Austin looked at me and been like, this is impossible. We're not even going to try this because this can't work, won't work, and you're dumb for even suggesting it. But I think given that mindset, it allows you to ask a lot of the important questions like, why aren't we doing this? We should be doing this. And also seeing the potential in areas where a lot of people haven't even tried to like dream or see anything bigger. And I think that's kind of very much shaped me into the person that I am today. And yeah, I think that's probably one of my bigger takeaways. And also kind of being able to align myself more with what makes sense from a business point of view, which I think is a skill that not a lot of people do. Like, I think a lot of people get very caught up in the how, right? But not the why. And I think while the how is definitely important, if you can't get to the why, then you'll be doing a lot of throwaway work and you will be shut down a lot without understanding why. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I would add to that some of my own experience, which is really not giving up at the first sign of danger or the first sign of difficulty in a project like this. And I think both of us exhibited that, I mean, week after week, because I guess I forgot that you used this as a research project and you also took this onto a conference later, which you did use this to win something. But I don't know if you won money or anything. It was just...
It wasn't... No, I got money. I forgot how much.
Oh,
like
nice.
$2,000 or something like that.
Oh, wow.
Which is a not small amount of money. Like, I'm not... but it was
Yeah.
It was like a thing at Berkeley where we... no, it was a conference, but it's not a conference where you win anything. It's just a conference where you explain what it is that you've made.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I did take it there. That was a tangible outcome. Yeah, I forgot that happened. Yeah, I went to Berkeley for a while and just kind of chilled there for like a weekend, I think.
But definitely a very different environment, which is why they probably rewarded our effort for that. But SICK was not looking for that.
Nope.
But yeah, I would add it's definitely, that was a big thing from this project, was not giving up right away, and that's also changed my brain in a plastic way. I think that's something that'll stick with me forever. And it's something you have to learn again and again, but you practice it more and more and it gets easy every time you do it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that's our podcast, folks.
Hell yeah.
I don't think you can say hell on here, but
it's too late.
Allow it.
Well, you said it too.
I said it because you said it. Well, thanks again for listening. This is our podcast, Failing Forward. Again, learn to fail and you'll finally succeed. My name was Nick.
And I'm Harris.
My co-host is Harris. Oh, okay. Well, that's another failure that will make us better.
Still failing to this day.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, folks.
Thank you. I don't know how to end it.